Hello and welcome, and please take a seat in our virtual Space Café. Today, we are recording this webinar session and we will make it available on SpaceWatch.Global after the session directly. We're also streaming the Space Café today on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on X, if everything goes according to plan. And if you have any questions, please use the chat section on StreamYard, on Facebook and YouTube. Sometimes also it works on LinkedIn. That all should be connected and channel it back to us. And I encourage you to send us your questions and be engaged with us in this session. One last point before we start, please keep your messages in the chat in a professional and respectful tone. Otherwise, we have to take actions. Hello, everyone. It's Torsten Kriening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global here. And first of all, let me thank all our business club members for their support. This is what allows us to keep our independent journalism alive. And we really appreciate your help. If you want to know how to join the business club, just see the banner below or click the link we are putting in the chat right now. Remember also to sign up for our newsletters. We have a daily one, an exclusive weekly one, and a space communication one. Our team will post the links for the sign up in the chat. So you just click on the link to sign up for free and get involved. And don't forget to listen to our collection of podcasts. We have hundreds of them, literally. You have plenty of choices. Our Space Café podcast channel is now in the chat, or our Space Café radio channel. And coming up soon is a very new initiative, our Space for Good podcast channel focused on space for climate, environment, and the global community. You can start to follow it. The first episode will be coming out very soon, but much more about it later. And if you want to become a Space Watcher, please visit our fan shop on our website. Okay, now we are done with the ad and we will finally start. With that, I'm handing over to your host today, Professor Steven Freeland in the Blue Mountains, somewhere near Sydney. Steven, the floor is yours if I get you back. And here you are.
Hey, hi, Torsten. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope everybody is well. We are now in the Olympic time. We're going to hear a lot more about that very shortly. But welcome to the 17th of our Space Cafe, Space Law Breakfast. Torsten, the numbers are coming up. And I think everybody who's here, hopefully you have an idea about how this podcast works, but we have fabulous people talking about really interesting, real world, current, contemporary, and highly relevant issues about space, the use of space, how we govern space, the security of space, the benefits of space. And we really try to demystify some of these issues and look at, if you like, the what, the why, the how of how to move forward in space to make sure that we promote and maintain its safety, its security, its stability, and its sustainability. And we've got tonight, or this morning for you, tonight where I am, two amazing people, good friend Juliana Suess and Marco Ferrazzani as our guests. I'll introduce them in a moment, but of course, we need to work out where we are. You can see our back here. We're in sunny London. Juliana has invited us to a cafe, which is very special very special. So, Juliana, good morning to you. Where are we and why are we here?
Good morning, Stephen, and welcome to London. We are at the Café Olympic in London. It's in Stratford, which is in northeast London. And obviously, we had to choose this cafe because the Olympics have officially started. So instead of meeting in Paris directly, Café Olympic is the place to be.
Well, it certainly is. And thanks for inviting us here. Marco, I hope you can hear us. You are actually there.
Yes, and now I can.
Yeah, you are actually there in Paris at the moment. The opening ceremony went right past your wonderful house. Tell us, what's it like there in Paris at the moment?
Hello from Paris, the Olympic city today for the next 2 weeks. The games are everywhere in town, even here at the ESA Space headquarters in the center of Paris. We're in the middle of open-air games, stadium, volleyball fields, swimming pools, tennis courts, bicycle racing, marathon avenues. All our European space assets in outer space are put to work for operating the Olympic organization now, such as weather satellites, telecom satellites, positioning, navigation satellites, all using modern technologies, European technology developed by ESA. So today, our voice and video is reaching you by space connections from Paris.
Wow, thank you, Marco, and thanks to ESA for giving us all of those programming. I was saying beforehand, at the end of the first day, Australia was leading the medal count, so let's hope that continues. Torsten, we're getting a bit of interference in the background there. I'm not sure what that is, but hopefully we'll sort that. Let me move straight on. We're going to look at some really interesting questions today with Juliana and Marco. We're going to look at why space is so important, not only from a benefits to humanity perspective, but also from a national security perspective. We're going to look at, are those two perspectives inconsistent or are they codependent? How do we deal with equitable access to space? What's happening in Europe given recent events with the Ariane 6 program? And there are many, many other issues we'll look at. Let me introduce our two experts. Firstly, we've got Juliana Suess, welcome. Juliana is a research fellow on space security as part of the military sciences team at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the oldest security think tank in the world. And she's also the host of another podcast, which I encourage you all to listen to, called War in Space. I had the pleasure of being a guest there a few months ago. Juliana was previously project officer and research analyst at RUSI International. She researches in global space governance, sustainability, counter space capabilities, space warfare. She holds an MA in conflict security and development from King's College and a BA in politics and international relations from the University of Reading. Prior to joining RUSI, she was an intern at the Ministry of Defence, where she researched various topics, including geostrategic security and stabilization, as well as the future and contemporary trends in warfare. Welcome, Juliana. And then my dear friend, Marco Ferrazzani. Welcome, Marco. Marco's Director of Internal Services and an Executive Board member at the European Space Agency at its headquarters in Paris. He's been in that position since 2024 and now is responsible for the structuring of the financial instruments for the funding of ESA projects, which is in excess of 7 billion euro. He's responsible for human capital, corporate services, the execution of the European space programs, in-space operations, as well as the resources for public programs management and the management of facilities in ESA establishments across Europe. He was previously ESA's legal counsel for 12 years. He'd been an advisor to the ESA Director General, and he managed an international team of lawyers in all areas relevant to space programs, including the interpretation of the ESA Convention, regulation, national legislation, legal policy and regulatory instruments. He also led Eastern negotiations of international space agreements, advising on lots of space projects in cooperation with government institutions such as NASA and other agencies, preparing and submitting decisions for approval of space programs, and for the work that he did in leading to the successful conclusion of the Lunar Gateway Agreement, which contributes to the Artemis program. Marco was awarded the 2020 ESA Teamwork Excellence Award. Among many, many other accolades, Marco is a board member of the European Centre for Space Law and a fellow board member of mine at the IISL, the International Institute of Space Law. And in 2021, Marco was awarded the title of Cavaliere by the President of the Italian Republic. So we've got wonderful people. Welcome to both of you. Our next tradition, but probably our most important tradition here now, is to ask both of you, Juliana and Marco, for your one word. If you had one word to describe the wonders of space and space law, what would they be? Torsten has, you can see there, prepared a list of suggestions from our previous guests. My word right at the beginning was intergenerational. Torsten's, not surprisingly, was ambiguous. So Marco, welcome again. Tell me, what is your one word for space?
My one word for space is cooperation. Cooperation is a very important word that shapes our endeavors, because cooperation means working among different people from various origins, various interests, and reflect the spirit of humanity, setting up efforts and undertaking the challenges to go to outer space, and therefore learn collectively from such endeavors. Which means for me also learning how to live better in cooperation on this planet.
Oh, thank you, Marco. And I think that encapsulates how we all think about space really well. Thank you. Juliana, you come from your perspective of space. What is your one word that describes it all?
My word is vital, because we depend on space for so many different things every day, often more so than we would ever realize. And that is obviously both for the civil, but also for the defense perspective that I obviously research. So to sort of stress our dependence and just how much we interact with space every day, vital is the word.
Vital. Okay. Well, I think cooperation and vital are excellent additions to our list, and I think very pertinent. So with all of that in mind, let's delve into the detail. As everybody's aware, Marco and Juliana, as you're aware, over the past 30 or 40 years, the rapid development of space technology has led to an increased dependency of all countries for continuous access to space. As Juliana, you hinted at already, space represents part of the critical infrastructure for all countries. It's vital for national security. Whilst it was always regarded as geopolitical and strategic in nature, I think we're seeing that being highlighted even more. So, Juliana, if I can turn to you, your work looks at how we analyze the main security-related considerations regarding space. Perhaps I could ask you, could you put that in context for us? You know, how important do you think space is for national security interests? And what are the space-related threats that might compromise those interests? And are these concerns consistent across all countries, or is it more pressing for certain countries? And if so, why? It's very complex, I know, but I'm sure you can put it into context for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, space is absolutely essential for defense and security. Again, I think that's quite often a sort of underappreciated sort of segment of defense, is actually that space is, you know, supporting a lot of these infrastructures and capabilities that operations now could not sort of live without. So the UK already says that the vast majority of operations could not be sustained without space, and I would, you know, go out on a limb here to say that's probably true for most countries. that we're looking at. I mean, this involves navigation, communications, intelligence gathering, satellite images, but also radar data, but also, the sensors that we see for early warning missile defense. So, most of these sort of everyday sort of capabilities that we consider for the military are already supported, if not entirely reliant on space. But obviously this utility of space and its dependence on space also makes it a target for counter-space measures and weapons. There's obviously kinetic and non-kinetic, electromagnetic and cyber capabilities that could disrupt space assets, if not altogether, destroy one. We've definitely seen this happening in the war in Ukraine as well, where we've primarily seen jamming, spoofing and cyber attacks against space assets. Obviously, some states have more to lose than others, right? You ask sort of who does this sort of affect most? For example, if we're looking at the US, that's obviously the predominant space power. But I think it's an illusion to say that we not all depend on space to some degree. So whether it's as an active space power, whether it's as a space user, this definitely affects all of us.
Yeah, it's that you've really summarized that well. Marco, we just heard from Juliana about how important space is for national security and also its relationship to military perspectives. So you're a senior director at a major intergovernmental agency that's focused on missions that are largely reflective of peaceful activities in space. Those activities help us to expand the benefits that we can gain from space. So how can we reconcile these, perhaps clashing goals of using space? On the one hand, space is so crucial for, as we've heard from Juliana, protecting and furthering national security interests and everything that will involve. But on the other hand, space is crucial for the promotion of peaceful uses that give rise to widespread benefits. So how do we reconcile those two different perspectives? Marco?
Yes, Steven, thank you. Your question is really at the climax of it, because you discuss about reconciling apparently conflicting goals. But if I look at the history of human civilization over centuries, all advances, all discoveries carried with them opportunities and challenges, how to reconcile conflicting goals. And the goal today is how to explore and to exploit technologies and new resources. So accessing, exploiting outer space is a conflicting game, but also it's ultimate opportunity and challenge because of our ingenuity in researching, discovering, and also because it delivers an enormous potential, enormous power that is given by the available technologies today. But this reconciling of conflicting goals has always been around the history of humankind since centuries. More than ever today, space is a challenge about that, because it's a matter of balancing national interest with available intelligence and access to technologies towards the collective interest of peaceful, because peaceful is not just a word, it is a collective interest of one people, of many people, for a sustainable and healthy life on the planet. So that's the ultimate goal with the national interest. So it's an act of balancing on collective wisdom of mankind.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Juliana, listening to you and listening to Marco just, highlights how multifaceted space is and how the governance structures and frameworks that we need for space can, and I often say this, maximize benefits, minimize risks, because there's always going to be risks. But just reflecting on what you've both said, can we say that the national security purposes and the peaceful purposes are really, in a sense, diametrically opposed, or are they in fact complementary? By which I mean they're two sides of the coin. I often argue you can't have one without the other. You can't have security without sustainability and peaceful uses. You can't have peaceful uses without security. Do you agree with that, or am I being a bit naive?
Well, I would agree with you. I think ideally they would go hand in hand, right? And I think there's also a sort of sense of realism here, in the sense that the initial motivation to enter space back in the 50s was for military purposes. So to say now, can we use space for purely civil purposes? I think we're sort of past that point. And obviously we also do have the dual use dilemma, in the sense of there's obviously assets that can be used for both, nefarious purposes, but can also be used for defense, national security, civil purposes. I think, for example, satellite images is sort of the perfect example for this. Obviously, it can be used for peaceful purposes, agricultural purposes, climate change indicators, etc. But it can also be used for intelligence gathering, right? So I think space security assets, in that sense, can also be used to create stability, right? Serve as verification measures, for example. And I think there was an example back in the Cold War where actually satellite images revealed that the weapons stockpiles that the US thought that the Russians had at the time was actually much smaller than had been initially sort of thought about through other measures of intelligence. So on the other hand, obviously, you do have the concern about spying in space. So I do completely agree, Stephen, that it is sort of two sides of the same coin, but I do think they can also go hand in hand.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it just highlights that, we really need to have a nuanced and holistic view of space if we're going to talk about governance. So, Marco, you are one of the world's leading experts in the governance of space. And you and I think, agree that the principles that we've had for many years, developed through COPOS, through the treaties, have served us really well. But space, as we've heard, is constantly changing, and we need to perhaps augment or complement what we've got with additional guidance. So, putting in perspective, where does the international framework of space, the one we know well, fall within a broader system of law and governance, and how do we apply these differing perspectives to use space? Are there synchronicities or there are inconsistencies about how we govern space, given that, as you said before, there are sometimes conflicting goals? So how do we put that all together?
Well, you're right. Governing space is a very complex system, as much as the world is a complex system, very complex. So I give you an example about Earth national resource. Very much like the issue of governing Earth resources, outer space is a very unique and powerful opportunity. It has to be well understood, well preserved, and handled with great care. It's a responsibility that we have collectively, all of us in the planet. So space provides a very exciting and apparently easy access to very powerful unlimited dominance as you go to space. But it also can turn around and become and be played against all operators that go to space, in terms of, if happens, preventing access and use of orbits, including preventing the apparent dominance that go to space. So it is, I would say, at the same time, a curse and a blessing out of space. Huge opportunity and huge risk. And the matter is how to save the resource for the future generation. So as long as we see it as a collective interest, to have that in mind for the long term, we are on the right track. On the other hand, a destructive approach would mean compromising the resource for the future, for all on this planet. And we all become losers of the same battle. So both Earth resource and space are vital systems. For me, it's the same one vital system, Earth and space. And this is to survive and to travel to the future together as mankind.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes we look at it in silos and we think about the Earth environment, and then we think about the space environment, and we think about that these as two separate things. But I think it's really important to hear what you say about, again, looking at things in a broader perspective. So, Juliana, we just heard Marco talk about, some perceptions that people have about dominance of space, and there are clearly widely differing capabilities in different actors' abilities to access space. Some even have no sovereign space capability whatsoever, and they're reliant completely on others to have access to space to get the benefits that we've spoken about. So is there a way to look from a security perspective? Would it make more sense? Do we need to work harder to promote, in a sense, a greater degree of equitable access globally, rather than, a small number of relatively powerful spacefaring actors and others struggling with their capabilities? Should we try to promote broader equitable access to space? And if so, how do we do that, given how complex the geopolitics of the world is? Don't worry, these are very easy questions, I'm sure, but I'm sure you'll help us out here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we can hash it out over the next 45 minutes or so, Steven. I mean, this is the thing where access to space is essential, whether it's sort of access to launch or whether it's sort of access to the space services. I think, on both sides, we definitely need to work on making that access sort of more broadly available and making it sort of easier for countries to join and, being able to benefit from space. And I think we have also seen examples where potential monopoly can actually be quite dangerous, right? I mean, we used to rely on the Soyuz rocket for a really long time, up until 2019, when SpaceX came up, also with the Dragon capsule that allowed sort of US or generally Western access to the ISS as well. And obviously we saw the OneWeb satellites that were being impounded, when the war started in 2022. So, I think specifically for access to space and thinking about launch capabilities, I don't think that necessarily means that we need spaceports in every single country. I do think that's perhaps unrealistic. But assured access to space regionally, for example, I think gives strategic stability, also strategic autonomy, if we're thinking about sort of European access to space as well, and would also help boost the sort of surrounding space economies. So I think space partnerships, again, whether it's on launch or whether it's sort of access to space services generally, is a really good way to go about this. Allowing countries that are not currently space powers to sort of leapfrog technologically and benefit from larger powers in that way, and also potentially develop niche technologies that can sort of fit into the sort of broader partnerships here. And I think we've seen sort of similar things working for NATO, for example, where NATO has said they're not going to develop own space capabilities. Instead, we'll rely on member states to provide those. And we've also seen EU projects where a lot of countries have come together to fund large projects together that wouldn't have been possible on a sort of unilateral, perhaps even bilateral basis. So I think space bridges, space partnerships, cooperation projects that also build trust and sort of build partnerships are the way to go.
Yeah, I agree. Although getting that sharing of technology, that bringing in of new partners is sometimes quite challenging. But you mentioned about launch capability, you mentioned about access to space, and Marco this month has seen the commencement of the Ariane 6 launch program. That, in a sense, reinstates Europe as a major launching entity again. That in itself is important for alleviating some of the elements of a lack of access. But of course, in this environment there's deep geopolitical overtones. I've heard many people say that in the difficult geopolitical environment it's never been more important than ever. It's never been more important that Europe is a major player in space, which it is, but I think the Ariane 6 program is an incredibly important part of that. So perhaps speaking with a European hat on, what role do you see for Europe in terms of the ongoing governance and the standard setting for space?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. First, the maiden flight of Ariane 6 this July earlier for us, came to close a very difficult period for Europe, not having its own access to space. And that's fundamental, both politically and technically. Ariane 6 is the European rocket of today, but also adaptable to future needs and future mission because it's modular, and Ariane 6 will evolve over time. And it marks the renewed possibility of Europe gaining autonomous access to space, but also selling services around the world. Ariane 6 is more powerful than the previous version, Ariane 5, more versatile, more precision, and also the production cost is 40% less.
Wow.
And the time between launches is reduced. So it will gain the possibility for Europe to become competitive again on the launch market. It lifts off from a very modern dedicated launch complex in the European spaceport in French Guiana. And also the pad and the rocket was built with having in mind sustainability and environmental impact, both for the rocket itself, because it flies on liquid oxygen and hydrogen, and the fact that it orbits itself at the end of the mission, so we don't leave debris in outer space. The launch pad also is limiting carbon footprint and preserving local natural resources. So it is altogether, the overall program is quite exciting and looking at sustainability. Even the satellites and the parts of the rocket that come from Europe into French Guiana in South America are transported by what we call the canopy sailboat, which is designed to transport the rocket stages, ensuring reduced carbon footprint because it goes on sails across the ocean. Itself, then Ariane 6 is a big ESA achievement. ESA programs are made in cooperation among the European countries. In this case, it was industrial network of 13 European countries, with having as a design authority ESA and the Ariane group as industrial partner. So it is a very exciting program. It's a big success. It's operational, but also it opens a new scenario in Europe, what we call the industrial scenario of launchers, because it opened the possibility now of separate operations with the company Ariane to sell the Ariane 6 launch services to orbit, and the other company, Avio, to sell directly the Vega launch services into orbit, which is the smaller European launcher. So we'll have two operators, and that's what we call stabilized exploitation of launch services. But also we're proposing something else from ESA, the European Launcher Challenge, which is to address to any European company who is able to put up new sustainable vehicles in space, which will open other operators and other class of services from many operators. So not only it's Ariane 6, but it's a new approach. It's a new scenario for Europe. So depending on the type of payload of customers from all over the world, we have options on offer from Europe, from several European launch operators. New small launcher, even new launch bases from European territories, new operators are emerging in Europe. And the offer looks very competitive at all levels. It's very exciting time and scenario.
Yeah, it certainly is exciting times indeed. And Europe is back at its rightful place as a major space region. So, Juliana, that really makes me think about governance again, but now thinking as the world is becoming more multipolar in terms of space capability. We've got Europe, we've got obviously the traditional spacefaring nations, we've got new and emerging ones. Do you think, particularly from your perspective of security, do you think we should govern space, should that sort of come down to a regional level? Or do you think that we should continue on this multilateral path of a globally agreed set of rules of the road? What do you think is more appropriate as the way the world changes when it comes to space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately we do need international rules to govern space. I think that's the only way to go. I am a bit pessimistic about where that's currently going. I don't think we will see a sort of internationally agreed set of rules anytime soon. Space is not an apolitical space. It's not separate from the politics of the world. And the current geopolitical dynamics just don't lend themselves to that level of sort of cooperation. So I think in the meantime, I do think that sort of regional or perhaps otherwise sort of coalitions of the willing can make a good start in sort of setting standards and showing that certain rules and norms can work. We have seen this obviously back in beginning of 2022, I think it was, when Vice President Harris called for a moratorium on kinetic ASAT tests. That has obviously seen a lot of support. I don't think that in itself is sort of going to fix the problem that we have of the sort of lack of rules. But I do think it can show that there is broad consensus on these issues. And I think it can serve as a sort of step in between to getting to the point where we can have these discussions again at an international level and hopefully get somewhere. But I do think to actually govern space effectively, we do need international set of rules.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously for the work that I'm involved with at the multilateral level, I'm perhaps a little bit more optimistic than you are, but only cautiously so. But so, Marco, in light of everything we've talked about here, you and I have spoken before about dangers of, in a sense, fragmentation of the way we govern space, of the structures, of the mechanisms, of the framework. Is that potential for fragmentation, is that simply just a sign of the times that we now have multipolar, if you like, blocks that sometimes don't look like they're going to cooperate, using your word from before? Or should we do everything we can to strengthen and maintain the centralized framework for adding principles, notwithstanding the challenges, notwithstanding the different actors, the capabilities, the perspectives? Where do you sit on this spectrum of how we govern space and what's the appropriate mechanism?
World governance at any time is a result of the circumstances of the moment that are on the field. In the past, we have seen the very well-structured cooperation of nations who enter space, when it was also harder, more difficult to get into space. We still see today planetary science mission that allow teams of scientists from all countries together to learn and develop knowledge for the understanding of the universe in search of the origin of life. We have world meteorological satellite data produced and exchanged daily and freely worldwide for the purpose of public good and to save lives on the Earth. We have global public operators such as Intelsat or Inmarsat providing so-called regulated universal services to all countries. So we have from the past heritage of good systems, of good principles. And we've seen also partner states teaming up on the longest and most significant cooperative scheme of fantastic laboratories in outer space, such as International Space Station. Planetary science mission allows scientists from all countries to learn and develop knowledge. So there are a lot of very good examples that we take from the past. All this wealth of progress and knowledge will not disappear. But of course, I agree with you. Since some years, we see the mood has moved more into what we call self-interest of some nations or some grouping and new geopolitical attraction systems. And not just because of space, because of many other current reasons. Of course, this creates some exclusions, some fragmentation. More resources are devoted first to national interests and only secondly to worldwide cooperation. More results are oriented for the short term and for local reasons, even if they are less efficient for the overall system and for the long term. So that's true. It's a trend. The pendulum for now is swinging in that direction, but I'm confident and optimistic it will swing back in the long term. It will take more time, but we have to preserve what we have, the good cooperation I mentioned, and see some wisdom in the long term, and the pendulum will swing back, but it may take some time.
Yeah, thank you, Marco, for reminding us about the fact that space still is very cooperative and very global with these benefits, notwithstanding everything that we hear and see. But I think we all agree with you, it's a challenging time. Okay, now we have our reality check, because I'm going to ask my dear friend Torsten. Torsten, you've heard now from Juliana about how vital space is. You've heard from Marco how we need to engage with more cooperation because of the benefits that space gives us. Clearly, there are many challenges, but space is important not just for strategic and military purposes, but also for the benefits of humanity and, in fact, the future of humanity. So I know you find space sometimes ambiguous. What do you think? What do you think is the right balance that will allow us to use space appropriately, given that we can't ignore any of the perspectives that we've heard from today?
What an easy question. And the standard answer would be 42 as a right balance. No, but I agree with everything what Juliana and what Marco said so far. And there's no argument against that. My challenge is that I see that we color space in pink, that we are moving away from a truthful reporting about what's going on. We are covering things, we are wrapping them into the success story, even they're just partially success. Some examples to illustrate what I mean. I'm very clear see that these pure peaceful, pure civil days of space are over, but I'm even questioning they've never been there, because we started, as Juliana pointed out earlier, from the ultimate high ground and with the geopolitical strategic national defense side. So we are trying to claim it in a peaceful way, and what is great. But how peaceful are we? I mean, I had the pleasure to attend the last Copius session in Vienna. And for me, that was shocking. That was shocking to me on a level, and I'm obviously a few decades on this planet Earth already and have some experience and thought I have seen everything, but that was shocking to see the behavior of one nation, in that case Russia, in an aggressive way on an UN level towards more or less anyone who said something against Russia. And that was a level where I say, we see space as a reflection of the politics on Earth that we have. And the politics, the situation on Earth at the moment getting more and more complicated, more and more diverted instead of coming together. And I'm not talking about the US election at the moment. I'm talking about the ongoing wars that we are seeing, seeing the news from this morning from the Middle East, from Israel Gaza side. These are super concerning, and we see this as a reflection in space. So I'm coming back to the truthful reporting. Ariane 6 was a great success without any doubt, and we hope for that with the delay, with the overrun of expenses, Europe can gain access to space, and it got. But there's no zero debris. What ESA just signed, and we reported about it, and it's a great initiative. No, there are 7.5 tons of debris in the upper stage, which will remain in space for the next 50 years if everything goes well. 7.5 tons. That is not really zero. So, and why is that not addressed in an open way? I mean, we are all grown-ups, and we are all, for our own governments, can go for the election. So we have a right to listen to the truth. And I think this, what you mentioned before, the national sovereignty versus a group effort, coming together, joining together, that's great. That's what we have in Europe here. And that's the idea. But is IRIS a success? Question mark. So, and we see many dilemmas on a level underneath that. So my point is we don't have another chance than to balance that. And I would like to see it with optimistic eyes, but I have a hard time to apply on that because I see it more and more diverted. And we haven't spoken about China here in our Space Café today at all as a big player, or India at the moment as an allied player, and all of these middle powers that are growing up, and they want to have their stake. And so I hope that we see a balanced approach to space, which I have doubts that we really can apply that, at least when it comes to low Earth orbit, the commercialized orbit, because we have the commercial element in, and also in a foreseeable future for the moon and the moon economy, what's going on there.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry for painting a picture that's gray, dark gray.
That's great. That's why I think you and I work so well together, because we have a different perspective. I mean, of course, everything you've said is so important. But we sometimes forget some of the amazing things that are happening in space. And, there's a lot of positivity there as well. And I think that all of us want, Juliana and Marco, yourself and myself and everybody watching, is that we see, you don't listen to just one side of the equation. You recognize that there are many things in space. What happens over here has consequences over here, but space is just a wondrous thing, and we just have to maintain that. So on that somber tone, Marco and Juliana, this is the Nobel Peace Prize question for you both. Taking account of everything that we've heard, right? If you had a magic wand and you could add one thing to the international governance framework for space that we have, what would that be that you think would most appropriately help us with the safety, security, stability, and sustainability of space activities going forward? Juliana, a Nobel Peace Prize beckons if you can get it right. So over to you. What's the one thing we need?
And it's not even 9:30 in London. This is particularly difficult. I think it's a setting out of responsible behaviours, specifically around rendezvous and close proximity manoeuvres. I think there's a huge amount of risk of miscalculation here. And I think this goes hand in hand with confidence building measures, obviously. And that was something that we saw some, modest but still success back in 2013. So I do think that these go hand in hand. I think this goes specifically for things like debris mitigation measures, which obviously we've seen these technologies grow over the last couple of years. I think they're hugely important to sort of make sure that we can keep the environment as safe as possible. But obviously we've also seen how these technologies are immediately sort of then also seen as a potential danger or as a potential risk. So I do think that is currently where we see sort of security and sustainability sort of almost at odds with each other. But ultimately we do need these technologies to make everything works. So I don't think an outright ban is going to help us. There's, problems around verifications. There's a dual use dilemma. Again, thinking about debris mitigation in particular. So I think we need to build processes that build trust sort of going forward. I think it's the only way to gain consensus later that would then help us to actually, agree to a set of rules and norms.
Okay. Marco, would you like to share the Nobel Peace Prize with our dear friend Juliana? What's the one thing that you think we need above everything else to add to what we've already got?
Yeah, I'm happy to share what has been said about long-term sustainability and building confidence, because in my view, neither prohibiting activities will work, because we know the limited compliance and enforcement of international law. Neither providing mandatory common infrastructure will prevent separate initiatives or exclusion of clubs of nations here and there. We see the lessons from treaty making, the lesson from debate on accessing space resources. It can be divisive. So one source of hope for the Nobel Prize is, in my view, the trust in global awareness and political engagement of generations to come, so that they better understand, take up the cause and the benefit of a shared, sustainable, and respect for space environment. I can say it. It is emerged in the last decades from the international movements on the protection of Earth climate. At least in our countries, the awareness of younger generation played a very powerful political pressure to shape public policies and state behaviors. So in addition to the Earth Day, we should see a Space Day, which has flavor of sustainability and protection. On the contrary, I see when outer space appears in the media, I see a very common narrative of space conquest, prestige game, who is getting here and there, the moon and Mars getting first on here and there, the building the myth of space heroes. This is easy and fun. It can be entertaining, but our message to younger generation could be better than that. The one about sustainability and cooperation. So I think it's a message I address to the media, and it takes time to do that, of course. But you're a media, so we can start here today to address that message to younger generation, so that they can build up the political pressure. That's an idea.
I couldn't agree more. We've had on our previous space breakfast a number of amazing people from the younger generation, if you like. Anyone younger compared to me, but from the younger generation. And one of the things that they've said is they've got these fantastic ideas, they've got these needs, they've got this understanding, but they're not being listened to. That voice isn't being heard. So I think, Marco and Juliana, your messages are so important that, we have to broaden that discussion. We have to ensure that, space moves forward with that long-term sustainability, not just for one generation, but for many generations moving forward. So thank you both for sharing that. It's been a fantastic discussion, but now, Torsten and Emma, over to you. Questions. We might have some questions that our experts could deal with. So Torsten, can I hand you the floor?
Thank you, Steven. Our audience is very quiet today. We have some comments, like good to hear that access to space is on the agenda from LinkedIn, and from Donna. We got a statement about the Ariane 6 transport using sail power in that, but otherwise it's very quiet. So maybe, of course, you have prepared as well a number of questions, but let me try to throw a few in, because I have the feeling that our conversation today was very super smooth. There was no controversial aspects in what we laid out. So we all agree that space is important and how we use it, and we have to do more. But what concrete does it mean? We have an upcoming UN event, and all of you are very aware of that, the Summit of the Future. So where space has a chance to be addressed really on the top UN level. So how are we doing it? And talking with Arti Holomeini, the Director General of UNOSA, she says, we are fighting for each and every inch into this agenda to get it clear. So space, and Marco said that I can't agree more. The mainstream press takes space as an event, as an happening, as an astronaut thing, a rocket thing, or so. But that's not the space we are talking about. Yeah, we are talking about the boring stuff, the stuff that just works, that stuff that gets our connection from A to B, that broadcast TV signals in the last decades. It provides communication and so on and so forth. That's a space we are talking. We are talking about an infrastructure, and that comes back also to so many countries does not see space as a critical infrastructure. UK has it, France has it, Germany discusses about that. So we have this diversity of how space is perceived. So I would like to hear from the experts, what can we do to address space to the politicians? And Marco, your Director General, he talks to all the top politicians, at least from the member states. And even in Europe, we have the diversity.
Yeah, just adding to that, and then we'll go to Juliana and Marco. The experience has always been new governments, new ministers. You have to start the whole educative process again with government about the value of space, about why space is important, not just, as you say, for prestige or for the really quote unquote sexy stuff that we see in the media, but for everyday life. And often when I give talks, people say, "Oh, space law, that's the future. How exciting!" And I have to remind them that space is mainstream. It is where we are now. And so it's an educative process, podcasts like this, like Juliana's, all the work that Marco does, all the work you do, Torsten, help with that educative process. But in a sense, we're preaching to the converted. We all understand that already. So perhaps Marco first, how can we broaden? I mean, we all think it's important, but how can we really broaden the understanding of space beyond those who are, inherently interested in it? How can we make people aware that really the future of humanity is dependent on us finding commonality rather than differences? The future of humanity is dependent on not transporting terrestrial tensions, but to talk about cooperation. Marco, how do we broaden the message to those who otherwise wouldn't listen?
That's a good point I tried to make. As it happened for Earth climate and climate change concern, it took media several years, even decades, from the Rio Convention in 92 to introduce to general public why climate change is so impactful in media. Now you see it every day, every summer, every winter, in many areas of the world. People accept that they have to care about climate and climate change and gas emissions and all this. It took how many decades? Several decades, several political rounds, many different controversial conferences here and there, the Paris Agreement. So the future of space lies in the fact to explain in general public, especially younger generation, that they have benefits and their future lives, the quality of life on Earth depends on space. That message is difficult. It's not a technical message. It's not a matter of engineers or rocket scientists. It's a matter of citizens. Only when that message will get across to the younger generation, then will happen this kind of awareness movement, so that future of life on Earth or life in the universe is more important than that astronaut or the other astronaut or that flag on the other side of the moon. This is what matters. And that's what we, space professionals, space agency, governments, have the duty to explain. Of course, we have a success of this last rocket, of course. But the whole point, this is just one step of a journey for mankind to live better on this Earth and use space in a more sustainable manner in the long term. And I'm afraid that the short-term message about heroes is hiding away from general public, because the public will space. Oh yes, this astronaut, this flag, this media tycoon, or the car is thrown into space. Oh, how wonderful! How exciting! That's. But it will take time. It will take also awareness and, as Juliana say, building trust. The space is delivering benefits.
So Juliana, I'm going to be a bit provocative with you here. As I said, you have a podcast which is fantastic, and I really enjoyed our conversation. But it's called War in Space, and I remember we had the discussion when you kindly invited me to speak that the last thing I want to do is talk about war in space, but I want to talk about preventing war in space. So obviously, your podcast is branded in that way because you look at the security aspects. But building on what Marco said, how do you think we get the message across? If people just think about security only and ignore all of the positive aspects and the vital aspects that you've talked about in space, then we're, in a sense, that war in space becomes more and more inevitable. So how do we stop that? How should it be never war in space rather than war in space?
I just want to add that the agenda for the podcast is not to start a war in space, very much to prevent one. No, it's it's difficult because I do think awareness generally of how interlinked space and defense and security are, I think that awareness is growing. And I think, Ukraine, for example, the war that we've seen, I think has done a lot to sort of shed a light on space, especially if we consider that the first one of the first attacks was against Viasat, a cyber attack, and sort of take out the space-based internet constellation. So I think in terms of growing the awareness for defense specifically, I think there needs to be a lot more that's done in terms of sort of training and preparation, because I do think that militaries generally train in unrealistically permissive environments where SATCOM is a given, navigation is a given. But that won't always be the case, right? We have seen the sort of GPS outages in Ukraine, for example. So these are scenarios that we need to train for as well. So there's a whole lot more to be done. But maybe this is the one time where I'm optimistic that the awareness is growing through people having these conversations and sort of as you say. Sometimes there is a danger of preaching to the choir, but I do think that these conversations are taking place more and more within defense circles as well, in terms of building resilience, in terms of hardening systems to an extent, or building enough systems that there will be a fallback in case there are sort of other attacks or sort of disruptions to the system. So yeah, I think the conversation we need to keep having them. We need to make sure that we talk to people that don't already know about space. Try to get more and more people on board. I think sometimes what happens specifically in space security is that you have sort of the space people talking security, and you have the defense people who talk a little bit about space, and it's usually sort of in the context of air and space or cyber and space. But I do think we need to broaden those conversations much more, and also highlight the dangers that we're talking about here. I mean, obviously we have seen sort of small events already that have created a lot of debris, whether it was tests or whether it was accidental collisions, but I do think we need to highlight the danger of that, and that sort of the weaponization of space is something that we want to avoid. So I do think that those conversations need to happen much more.
Yeah, I must admit, both you Marco and Juliana, said in your closing remarks to my Nobel Prize question, both of you said in different ways that you thought that prohibitions on weapons, some sort of prohibition, wouldn't work because people would find their way around. And of course, from a realistic perspective, I think we all agree it. But can I challenge you both on that to say, is that a reason not to do it? Is that a reason not to set a line in the sand and say, okay, of course there will always be bad actors, but we have that with any law that we have on earth, thou shalt not kill. We still have that line in the sand. If we start off by saying, as well as the moratorium on kinetic ASATs, but we start saying, okay, no weapons in space. You said, Juliana, then we just have to avoid the weaponization, which is in a sense interesting because you said before we shouldn't prohibit weapons. You're both dear friends, but I find that a bit conflicting. Would it not make more sense to find ways of verification, to find definitions, have that line in the sand, realize that perhaps the line isn't perfect, rather than saying it is all too hard, it's not going to work, so let's not do it? Because aren't we sending the wrong message then by not trying? I'm sorry to challenge you both, but you're the experts, and I really want to learn from both of you. Perhaps Juliana, how do you respond to what I've just said?
No, I completely see the contrast there. I like the challenge. I think the problem with that is that we're going back to definitions, because you can have a piece of paper that says no weapons ought to be placed in space. How do you define a weapon, right? I think this is the question and the sort of problem that has been had specifically on a multilateral level many a times, where we just cannot agree on what a space weapon actually looks like. Because if you're trying to go through sort of definitions, it's like, okay, does it have a robotic arm that can grab another satellite? well, check, that's most sort of current debris mitigation measures, does it have a potential laser capability? Okay, then what do we do about constellations with satellites that use lasers to communicate? It becomes really, really difficult to define a weapon. I just don't think we're going to see that happen. Again, we're back to dual use. So I think in that case, it would almost just be a sort of a piece of paper that we can use, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really serve us. And so I think that's where we come back to behaviors, right? You can talk about the capability all you like, but at the end of the day, it's what you do with it and how you sort of maneuver your asset in space that is actually the potential danger. And that's where the miscalculation comes in as well, because a robotic arm by itself doesn't threaten others. It's the behavior and how that asset is then steered that threatens others.
Yeah, I accept that, and I agree with you completely about behaviors. But I also think, that's what lawyers are for. That's what diplomats are for, to try to find definitions. If the definitions aren't perfect, then we build on them later on. But I sometimes in my own work can't accept necessarily people saying it's too hard. Except saying that it won't work from the beginning, and therefore we won't try. Look at international criminal justice, right? The criminal court says we're going to end impunity. We're never going to end impunity, and yet if we say we're never going to end it, so why try? Then I think we're sending the wrong message. Marco, am I too naive here, or what do you think?
No, you're right, and I agree with both of you. We have to have both the conditions, limits, and prescribing limits, prohibitions, and at the same time not be naive about that. We know the status of implementing international law. We know the limits. You made the case of international criminal jurisdiction, and work on the other side also on the creating the conditions, and creating what I call the public awareness about it. So, and again, it's two actions on the same direction that can be done. So believe in it and do it, and tell the right story around. Whereas we see, and that's what I noticed in the last few years or decades, a counter movement of not believing in law, not believing in behavior, and wanting to tell your own story, your own local and short-term story of the version. Now we are in the media world, in the battle of information around the world. Everybody can tell what he believes. It's a matter also of good understanding, actually, in the end, civilization, to get all the right information and get the information to the public, and especially to those who will have a say in deciding our future. And this is the point. That's what we do in Europe from ESA. We keep shaping and giving message to governments, politicians, to general public about why going to space, what is the benefit for peaceful purposes, and so on. So it's a matter that I see in Europe we do relatively well, but not as well in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you both. I'm sorry that I do challenge you. We do have
a few questions are coming in now, and statements here from our Emma, from our editor-in-chief, and it goes to Marco in response to what you said earlier. To allow a media perspective. So general media cuts a story on the basis on what they know sells more: money, billionaires, drama, and that's the crux. And that's what I mentioned before with the yellow press. And of course, that is not it does not represent the industry. However, how does the space industry reprise with the technological based narrative? We always start to tell our story from our tool satellites, our antennas. It doesn't get more excited that for someone who's not a space engineer, and the other. So the science narrative must be from humanity, from the problems, from something empathic that can bring the community in. It's just a statement, but we have from Camille McTravish a statement. She thanks us. It's a bit challenged here with the number of words to put in. But here comes a question. When laymen think about space militarization, we often immediately think of the deployment of space weapons and their use in warfare rather than military support activities, such as the use of satellite imagery for military intelligence purposes. See here, with more and more countries dedicating larger portion of their defense budget to space, including space militarization. I have a problem with this word, but I think you will point it out in a second, in their military road action plan, and listen space militarization as a military priority, or even creating space forces. Are governments hoping to dedicate all these efforts to the continued and reinforced support of military activities, or are we progressively edging closer to developing space weapons? So, at least there's the question.
Camille, thank you so much. Interesting comments, and I think we all agree that space has been used for military purposes since day one, virtually since day one, and increasingly so to support military activities on Earth. That's a given, and it wouldn't be any other way. But that's a world apart from this notion of developing war in space, for space to be this warfighting domain, for space to be this theatre of war. And I think we all understand that space is different, and the implications of that, there is no winner. I think, Marco, you said before, there's no winner in any conflict in space. We're all losers and humanity's losers. So I couldn't agree more that with Emma's comment as well, everything is revolved around humanity in the future. And we've got to find greater common interests. And there are so many common interests between all of those actors, even though they disagree, even though they may not all cooperate on everything. They at least have common interests to ensure that they can get on with their space activities because of that vital nature. So I don't know, Juliana, Marco, if you want to comment also on what
Stephen, I would like to put in here a book that I really recommend everyone to read. It's The Future of the Geography of the Future. It's a German version here by Tim Marshall. It's a bestseller, and it describes in the last chapter potential conflicts, how they can start. And it's not this big bang war in spacing, it's conflicts that starts on very stupid things of miscommunication, of not interpreting signals in the right way. Classical, how we also started war here on Earth, but not, of course, with these absolute unbelievable consequences that any war in space will have. Just a good summer reading or winter reading for you in Australia.
Thank you. Marco, Juliana, any last minute thoughts or reflections?
Just a quick one to say that I think sometimes it is used interchangeably, the sort of militarization of space and the weaponization of space. Stephen, as you've already pointed out, obviously the militarization of space means sort of using space for military purposes. Obviously that has been happening since Sputnik, but it's the weaponization that we're worried about, and that's the placement of weapons into space. So I just want to sort of, just because we're investing in the sort of militarization in space and sort of creating resilience in space and sort of being able to use space assets for military purposes doesn't necessarily mean that we're also investing in space weapons as such. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Marco, any last reflections?
Yeah, one final comment to put things in perspective. Today, we're speaking a lot about different use of space resources, militarization. There's a lot of hype about commercial, space tycoons, this rocket, the other one, going to moon, to Mars. If you look back only 10 or 20 years ago, there was a lot less public attention to all this. Space was something secluded only for the experts, for the space industry, for the space operators. We're using quite classical schemes to go to space. So in a way, and here I addressed the question before, space industry colleagues, all together we in space, in a way, we sort of pleased, even if it's a controversial topic, because space has been talked about. there is mention of space in general discussion in the politician. There are more interests of politicians to write national space laws. They did not exist 20 years ago. So space is more of a current topic. It's becoming more and more, which in a way is good because it creates what I called earlier to become a public awareness. But of course, the public awareness is not properly explained all the time. There are mixed messages, the right and the wrong messages. And Torsten said it very well. There are curious messages, there are fake news, there are controversial messages. So in the end, a good trend that space is being under public attention should be more. My call is to make it more correct, proper awareness of the benefits, especially for the younger generations, and so that it becomes a sort of public pressure. That's, say, a political way to tell it. But in general, we have to be attentive and pleased. There's more space around us. There's more attention. There's more investment. There are more private investment in space. Probably the numbers are controversial. Everybody has its own version. But we are in exciting times where we see more space becoming relevant and more proper message, more narrative of space is more and more relevant. So it's widening. The effect is widening. It's more important. And we all are collectively responsible to address it properly and give the right messages and the truth about the future. So I agree with Torsten. The future is the most important future space, also because we are going to live the future and not the past.
Exactly. And I think we all leave this podcast with a responsibility to, educate, talk to people who wouldn't normally be interested in space about how it is. Hey, listen, I think we've got to go because we're way beyond time as always. But Juliana and Marco, I can't thank you enough. You are dear friends, but you're also amazing. You have such amazing insights, and we've tried to marry all different perspectives of space together in one hour, and I think you've just given us so much to think about, and we're really grateful. Hope you had a great time yourself, and thank you, Juliana, for taking us here to this wonderful cafe in London. I'm about to have dinner, but I know you are all in Europe about to have morning tea. But thank you again, and at Torsten, thank you as well. Space Cafe Law Breakfast is such a fun thing to do, and we're already, you and I, talking about our next one, which will be probably towards the end of September, with, again, two amazing people. Details to come. But thanks, Torsten, also for your insights. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Steven. So, and before we say goodbye, let me remind you of a few upcoming events. We are aiming, as Steven said, 25th-ish of September for our next Space Law Breakfast, but we will keep you informed when it is confirmed. And we are moving, like many of us here in Europe, into the summer break, but I promise you that there is something very special and that reflects how we as media want to change the narrative. And I'm playing out now two very small, short clips. I don't know, can you hear the sound?
Yes.
Okay, because I can't. Okay, then it's good. So Space for Good is something that our Dr. Emma Gatti created.
New SpaceWatch.Global production. It's a podcast series focused on the intersection between space technology, the environment, and the global community. In each episode, we spotlight end users or companies from the Global South or involved with the Global South who are leveraging space technology to tackle urgent socioeconomic issues. Hunger, drought, conflict, sustainable development, biodiversity loss, and much, much more. If you have a story to tell or a solution to propose, I will love to hear from you. And if you are a Western company or an international organization dedicated to the peaceful and beneficial use of space, let's collaborate to shine a light on where space is most needed. I'm Emma Gatti, the editor-in-chief of SpaceWatch.Global, and this is Space for Good, the podcast that talks about technology without ever naming it.
So, I hope that will be something very interesting for all our listeners. So we produced 2 podcast episodes already, and yes, you might say it's just another podcast, but I mean that's one of the very interesting media at the moment that people are listening when they're doing their sports, commuting, or just enjoying it on the couch. I mean, it's hard to compete with the Olympics at the moment, but we try to get this challenge. So please find and subscribe to our next events, as mentioned before, or to our social media channels. As always, we would like to hear from you. Please send us your feedback on X, on LinkedIn, or Facebook for my generation. And don't forget to sign up to our newsletters. If you want to support more events like that, go treat yourself with something special, become a space watcher, or help us in our space on our business club program. Thank you very much for your interest today. And thank you, Steven. It's always a pleasure to run it together with you. Juliana, thank you very much. And Marco, for this very inspiring conversation. I would like to have it more controversial, but next time we will shape it a bit tougher. So I challenge you, Steven, with that as well. And thank you, dear audience, for joining us and for the tech team for the smooth operations. Hope to see you at our next event. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget to become a space watcher. Bye.
Bye.